Right, this one's gonna be a first, so dearest apologies in advance. So, there's a YouTuber by the name of PF Jung, and I'm going to be challenging one of his videos. Now, this is the older one, 3 years ago, titled Why Being Logically Consistent Doesn't Make You Right. And I'm actually going to play a bit of the video. I do apologize if it doesn't sound good. I've got it to the side. But I will try to play it and a few other clips, or at least one other clip, to try to make my point regarding logical consistency and challenge his beliefs regarding it. Now, quick context, he made this video and added as a example the abortion debate. That is the main one he used to make his point. So, I will, within context, be using the abortion debate as well. Now, I'm not going to state my exact position on it, even if you can probably tell from listening, but I'm going to be using it because that's what he used to make his point. Fair enough? Let's get into it. So, let's start the video.
In the world where we are in, one of the worst things that can happen is people say you're inconsistent. They feel like if you're inconsistent, that shows you must be wrong. It might show that actually what you're trying to do is to balance two things that in slightly different ways, in different circumstances, are equally important, but appear to our rather simple-minded way of looking at the world like contradictions.
So, to start off with the first statement, which he quoted from a man named Dr. Ian McGilchrist, he is correct in the first one, in that a lot of the time when it comes to inconsistency, a lot of the logical inconsistencies can come from the balance of two beliefs. That is true. When you hold two beliefs strongly, but don't know how to properly square the circle when it comes to consolidating and understanding them, they will clash. And when they clash, you create an inconsistency. Because on one hand, you may hold a value that emphasizes X thing as important, and the other as Y that is important as Y. Well, when X and Y are in conflict, that creates an inconsistency because if you've said that X is valuable, but you go with Y, then it looks like you aren't being consistent, which is fair. But there are more possibilities than just that. Another possibility that's important is that a person doesn't fully understand something, or they have rationalized things in such a way that they don't think they are being inconsistent. They think they are consistent. To give an example, and to use the abortion debate as this video will later go on to do, a person who believes in the right to life and bodily autonomy can believe abortion is moral, as it does not in their minds violate the right to life. This is not an intentional inconsistency, but inconsistency born out of a different or false understanding. If you do not recognize something as alive, as a human, then it is not murder to kill it. To use an extreme example, if you're a Nazi and you believe all Jews are subhuman animals, then it is not murder to take a Jew out back and put a bullet in their head. It's an extreme example, yes, but it serves to make a point. When you do not view something as a specific thing, it is not a contradiction to treat it as separate. A woman who aborts a baby on the basis that it is her body, her choice, does not believe that fetus is alive. They do not believe the zygote or the other things that you would classify as pre-birth to be alive. They are not alive in her mind. And so, to her, it is not an immoral thing to do so. Now, with the context, which I will later go into, about it being alive, yes, it is 100% alive. That lady is wrong. But there's a reason she made that inconsistent choice. It's because, in her mind, it was. To her, that was not a living being, and so killing it was not murder. Let's continue.
Important in understanding how the world
like contradictions.
This observation, aside from just being monumentally important in understanding how the world actually works, I think actually contains the seeds of the resolution to the abortion debate. Assuming there is a resolution that can be found, and it doesn't just destroy America in the process, which it kind of seems like it's doing. Here's how to think about it. There are only two sides in the abortion debate. Those who believe that aborting a fertilized egg is immoral, and those who believe that it is not. You cannot have an opinion on abortion without directly or indirectly falling into one of those two camps.
And here's a problem. He made a false dichotomy early on. Yes, aborting an egg that is fertile is either moral or not. That is correct. However, a person does not have to believe that it is moral to still allow it. Live and let live is a possibility where a person says that, yes, it is an immoral action, but I do not have the right to impose upon that person against them because, while it is an immoral action, I don't have the right to stop them. Similarly, a person can compromise with certain restrictions to save the mother's life or their children and say, okay, at this point, we won't allow you to do it because it's close enough that we shouldn't be killing them, or it puts the mother at risk, so we're going to allow an abortion then. Right? There are other options. A person can believe something to be moral or not. That is true to the dichotomy. But the options they have are numerous within that. A person can compromise maybe after a heartbeat, it's fine. After the brain develops more, it's okay. After you start seeing it through an ultrasound and see a distinct shape, okay, now it's alive enough to not abort. Numerous things can be used as new lines to draw. It is not only let abortions happen or let them not. There are multiple options because lesser evils do exist. A person can hold a more, shockingly, nuanced position where they say, yes, this is evil or this is wrong, but we do not have the reason to restrict them. With the abortion debate, you could argue that, yes, they do. But, importantly, you can have that position, and others can have it too. It does not have to be a one or the other situation. With abortion, you can argue that, yes, there is either right or wrong, but for some people, there are other options. And those other options should not just be swept away because you want to make a grand generalization. Continuing on.
Believe that aborting a fertilized egg is immoral are the only ones who can truly be said to be logically consistent. But the problem is, they are mistaking their logical consistency for truth. Here is the classic pro-life argument in a nutshell.
If you actually pick up any human biology textbook, it will tell you when life begins. It begins at the moment of fertilization.
Okay, let's agree that life begins at conception. What's the logical conclusion that follows from that premise?
It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human life. Therefore, abortion is wrong.
This framing is 100% logically consistent. And here is the problem that half of Americans have with that framing, despite it being logically consistent.
So, continuing on. Logical consistency does not mean true. I don't know if I've hit that point or I've gone slightly past it, because I believe I'm about to hit another, but stopping here, he is correct on technicality. However, truth itself is consistent. It can be proven, observed, or otherwise felt. When he goes on to talk about emotions, that's a feeling. You can observe the truth. The world is the world. It exists. Wood is wood. I can explain why it's wood, but I don't need to right now because the basics of it can be observed right now. You can see the wood, you can hear the wood, you recognize it, and it matches other examples of wood in your own life or others. The world operates on rules and stipulations. Gravity is a constant. I cannot, for example, drop this pen, or pencil rather, and it not fall. And if I drop it at the same time as something else, they'll fall at the same speed, because gravity is a constant. The world works on rules and stipulations. It works on constants and variables that are expressly known. Do we know all of them? No. But are we researching them to find them? Yes. Theoretically, there could be a teapot in space that we don't know about, but until we know about it, we're not going to act as if it exists. Why? Because that is a foolish idea. Logical inconsistency does not mean true. Yes. But true requires logical consistency. Squares and rectangles, people. A square is always a rectangle, but a rectangle is not necessarily a square. The truth has to be consistent. 2 plus 2 cannot equal 4 and 5 simultaneously. No. 2 plus 2 equals 4. 2 plus 3 equals 5. The truth must maintain consistency. If it is not consistent, it isn't the truth. It is a lie you have spread and like to edit as convenient, or you have made a mistake and are now trying to correct it. Maybe you're ignorant. Maybe it's malice. I don't know. I'll assume ignorance for the sake of being honest. But when it comes down to it, the truth must be logically consistent. You can't always feel it, but you can understand it. And you can process it and make efforts to understand it. You can't just dig your head in the sand and say, nope, I don't see it. I don't understand the truth, so clearly it must be inconsistent. No.
The problem is, I would be lying if it would be dishonest of me to accept your framing, because if I were to accept that framing, that would mean I would have to honestly believe that a woman who drowns her own 3-year-old in the bathtub has committed an equivalent act of evil to someone who took a pill after a one-night stand.
All right, time to correct him. See, the person he uses as an example is wrong on 2 counts. For one, there are levels to murder. Taking a human life without just cause has levels to it. Murder for revenge, as by a vigilante, is less bad than murder for petty justifications. Many people will observe this. For example, there was an instance where, after a father's son was molested by a person related to him, I believe his name was Gary Plush, the man who would later take action, Gary would wait for the person as he was about to be tried and shoot him in the head. Or at the very least, shoot him and kill him. And most people would find it was treated less bad as the murders that people have done for, say, pure entertainment, like a rapist who kills the person he rapes. See, murder is not just one thing. It has degrees to it, levels. Because the act of taking a human life, premeditated, can carry a lot of things. Because premeditation can mean more than just, I want to kill someone. It can mean, I want to kill a person because of X, or just because I feel like it. There are levels. And, adding on to that, there is also negligence, which would fall under manslaughter. See, negligence is often treated as lighter than just flat-out murder, because, well, it's an accident, more or less. Now, it's not completely accidental. Negligence requires basically acting in a way that you shouldn't, but it is still less bad than straight-up murder by, say, drowning. The law recognizes this for a reason, but it is more than just law. It is outside of law, and it is based in morality. Sure, a consequentialist won't care because what they care about is, well, consequences, but pretty much everyone else will, because fundamentally, when you have a situation and people are going to react to it, the justification for why is going to carry a lot of weight. A person who kills to defend themselves is going to be treated far lighter than a person who kills someone because they stole their bagel. Doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. Evil is evil, yes. Murder is murder. But it's not necessarily internally equivalent. You would not say that a person who gets a first-degree murder sentence is the same as a person who gets a second-degree murder sentence. And the second one is a complaint with the framing specifically. The framing suggests that the morning after pill and other similar actions are minor acts without any moral weight. This is false. Another way I could frame the scene, or anyone could frame it, is, without changing the honesty, if a woman were to choose to kill a life in her body produced by her own decisions because of the inconvenience it would cause. That is, in all practice, true. A woman choosing to kill the life within her body, that zygote or fertilized egg, because she doesn't want to deal with it after she made a choice that resulted in it, is what happened. The framing is to treat it as a neutral thing. It isn't. It is an action which carries an inherent moral weight. All it takes is the framing to see either that it does or doesn't. And if your argument relies entirely on framing, then you don't really have a good argument. Because that argument is reliant not on the thing underneath, the actual painting, but just what you surround it with to make it sound better. I'm sorry, but if I said, I'm gonna kill 6 million people because I want to purge all the unclean, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's still the murder of 6 million people. Continuing.
If you're
pill after a one-night stand.
that would make you consistent. They feel like if you're inconsistent, that shows you must be wrong. It might show that actually what you're trying to do is to balance two things that in slightly different ways are equally important but appear to are rather simple-minded way of looking at them, like contradictions.
Here are the two equally important things that we're trying to balance in this debate. The first is recognizing the unavoidable imprecision of our ability to identify exactly at what point a human life magically becomes valuable.
Do you think that like once the conception happens, there's some sort of a miraculous event? Like you could literally get to the point where the sperm cracks the egg. If you could scoop that egg out right there, would that be abortion?
Well, I mean, at some point you're going to have to say there was a magic moment that happened because you believe that we eventually become valuable humans, right?
And we have to balance that fact, that imprecision, with the obvious intuition that a woman who drowns her own child, a newborn baby, is not committing a similar act of evil as someone who took a Plan B pill after a one-night stand.
Alright, step one. I'm just going to correct this real quick. It's not magical, it's literal biology. There's nothing magical about sexual reproduction. That's literally just how we exist as people. See, human life has a point in which it starts. Now, why people value life is different depending on the philosophy they follow. But for practical reasons, it's pretty much considered valuable at the outset. For utilitarians, Kantians, and all other philosophies, they make their positions on this pretty clear. Utilitarians care about when things feel, and so the moment something can do that, it is valued. Could be a pig, could be a human, whatever. The life is valued. Kantians value reason, so the moment a being is capable of rationality, it is valued. But importantly, for humans, they can do both of these things at some point, and so, given enough time, that baby, which you allow to exist, will inevitably, assuming no outside interference, become a fully capable of feeling and rational being. And so, it is valuable. Humans are inherently valuable because we have that capability. And so, because we have sentience and sapience, both of these philosophies will hold us as valuable inherently. But here's the real question. When does life start? Well, it's when it meets the conditions to be alive. And what are those conditions? 1, it has a metabolism. 2, it can grow. 3, it can reproduce under normal circumstances, so once it's grown up. 4, it has cells. 5, it responds to stimuli. And 6, maintains homeostasis to be alive. Now, with number 3, there is the caveat of under normal circumstances, which I added, which is for a reason. If we were to ignore that, or rather, ignore it as a natural thing that a, for example, 3-year-old is valuable, let's just say that we think no human is valuable unless it meets these exact things without that caveat. Everything that is prepubescent can die, because it is not alive. So, we must recognize, okay, that is a very bad position to hold, and so instead adjust it to recognize all things which have the eventual capability to reproduce under normal circumstances to be alive. For example, a eunuch is still living because, yes, he may have his reproduction silenced and unable to function, but he is still capable of doing so, assuming he didn't go through the procedure. A person born naturally infertile would, under normal circumstances, have been able to reproduce. They are just, due to unfortunate circumstances, unable to. And so, they are still living. Guess what? A fertilized egg meets all of these criteria. It is 2 cells, so it has cellular organization. It responds to stimuli. It does its best to maintain homeostasis. It can grow. Literally, if you just look up a video of how the human develops within the mother, I do apologize for the pause, you can see its growth. And it has a metabolism. That's why mothers have to eat so much. Because the babies inside them demand food. Because it needs food to grow. And once born and reaching puberty, it can reproduce under normal circumstances. So yes, it is alive. That example he gave, the woman's fertilized. Yep, it is alive. Yes, that is an abortion if you kill it. And that is why so many people have problems with a lot of more, how should I put this, eccentric methods of reproduction, where you fertilize a bunch of eggs, pick the best ones, and then have those grow within the woman. Yeah. People have issues with that because every other one not chosen is dead. And under the argument of, if it's alive, then it would be murder to purposely terminate it. Yeah, that's wrong. And justifiably so. Guess what? It is alive. That means to terminate it is murder. And humans naturally are living. Once fertilization happens, we are alive. It's not magic, it's basic biology. So you can frame it as magical all you want to make it sound better for you, but it ain't magic. It's basic biology, people. And because it has human DNA, we know that fetus is definitely going to be human. And so, following the logic backwards of, if it will eventually reach the ability to reason and feel, then it must be valued. So too, are they necessarily valued as lives? If you cannot do that, then you are, in effect, dehumanizing a being, which is itself a problem. And, to go to the second one, there is a real difference between just murder, in the traditional sense, and abortion. And that difference is premeditation. For the most part, when you get an abortion, you are not thinking of it as a living being. There is not a premeditation of, I'm going to kill a being. You just take an action. And in the case of a Plan B or morning after pill, you're just consuming an object. There doesn't have to be a lot of thought behind that. You're just like, I did a thing, do this, boom, done. Is that premeditated murder? No. You took an action, yes, but you weren't thinking, I'm going to kill this thing. You were thinking, oh, I'm just going to take the pill, make sure I don't achieve a status. That's all you're really doing. So unless one wishes to argue that all women taking a Plan B or morning after pill plan on murdering their descendants, then they are two separate things. A person drowning a baby is knowingly killing their descendant. Because everyone at that point, pretty much, recognizes that thing as alive and has been treating it as such. The person does not have any excuse to not know, oh yeah, that's a human life. I guarantee you anyone else who has seen the baby will treat it as a life, and so they have, well, pretty obvious implications from there. But we live in a society that does not treat a fetus as alive, and as a human, so, naturally, the person can very well just dismiss it and not care about it. Or in the case of the zygote, well, they don't really care about it, and they just did a very emotionally intense action, so I doubt they're really thinking, oh yeah, I'm killing something that's alive inside of me. But that didn't even cross their minds. Would it be an evil? Yes, but it would be an evil on a different level. Remember, there are levels to this.
You're talking about a gamete or a zygote or a pregestation fetus, or you're talking about, somebody taking the morning after pill or something. Intuitively, people grasp, that's not murder.
Yeah.
What are you, a psycho?
Yeah.
That is literally categorically different. That's why we have different words to describe those things. That's why a gamete is a thing, and a zygote is a thing, and a pregestation fetus is a thing.
But wait a second.
And that is just a blatant false statement. See, we have different words to call individuals. Let's use those who are already born so we can make this point a lot easier. You could call an individual a toddler, a child, adolescent, teenager, minor, adult. They're all different words, yes. But despite the differences, they are still humans, and killing one is still murder when it is premeditated. If I pulled out a gun and shot you, no matter your age, yeah, that's freaking murder. There are words that exist to describe specific things. For example, murder, the premeditated taking of a life. Those describe more general things, like the taking of a life, which is homicide, and those to describe actions which are further delineated, killing, or just to take a life. Now, killing and homicide have similar definitions, but you can argue them slightly differently, because homicide is specifically the criminal way of describing it. It's specifically for crimes. See, murder is homicide and is killing. However, killing can be in self-defense, which, while one could classify it as justified homicide, is still separate as a crime and, thus, separate as an entity. Meanwhile, a person can get a homicide that is a manslaughter charge, which isn't murder. See, you can have words to describe the same thing. You can have plenty of them. But just because you have words to describe a thing does not make it different. You could call it rouge or you could call it red. You could call it any number of things from any number of languages. It's still the same freaking thing. It's just the words you choose to use, how fancy you want to be, or what specific tone you wish to imply, because a lot of the differences in our words are based on formality. And such an argument is frankly absurd to me, for a number of reasons, but the biggest is because this is a person speaking English. It's coming from a person who speaks a language notorious for having many ways to say the exact same thing. I can begin to talk, I can start to do something, I can commence an operation, etc., etc. Different words, same thing, with beginning and action. Literal, exact same thing, but different words. And so, if the argument is, oh, well, we have different words for this thing, so therefore they are different, you are speaking an absurdity. A zygote is still a human if it has human DNA as alive. It's that simple. It's still a human. Murder is still murder, even if that thing is a toddler, or a child, or an adult. It could be any number of things, as long as it is a freaking human, and it's a premeditated killing of a person. It's murder. It is not that complicated. I don't get how this person thought that was a good argument. Especially when, again, he is literally using words that mean the exact same thing in casual conversation. We do this all the time. If you've spoken English for even a passing amount, you would understand this. If you spoke any language, honestly, you would understand this. ¿Cómo está usted? ¿Cómo estás? Mean the exact same thing. You want to know the difference? Formality. Literally it. It's such a poor argument. I need to move on. I do apologize. That one gets me riled because it is so basic. On such a fundamental level. And it works, this quote, for both the zygote one and for the murder one. Yes, we may call it abortion instead of murder. If it is the premeditated killing of a human life, it still meets the definition. A zygote is still a human. If it has human DNA, is a Homo sapien, and it also is alive, which it is, then it meets the definition for a human. Those words still apply. It is still that. literal, basic understanding of how our language functions. You may want to treat it differently, and we do treat people differently depending on their age. That's why we have specific words for them. But we do not suddenly deny them their humanity because of it. A toddler is still a human. You may talk to them differently, you may treat them slightly differently, but you still acknowledge their humanity. Moving on.
Second, isn't that just an appeal to feelings and intuitions? That's not really an argument, right? Wrong. And if there is one thing you take from this godforsaken video, it is this. The inability to explicitly describe how you know something is true does not mean that it isn't true.
Correct, yes, you are correct in their final statement. You are wrong in everything else, but you are correct in that. So, when he says that's not an argument, technically it is, but that's like saying that the earth is flat is an argument. Yes, the earth is flat is a point you can make. Doesn't make it correct in any sense. See, the inability to explicitly describe how you know something to be true does not mean it is true, yes. But it is not on the person who is not making the claim, the person receiving your statement, to make the evidence that says, no, this isn't correct. It's on you to say why it's correct. These people have made their argument. The pro-life side have made their argument. Abortion is murder because it meets all these things. Okay, why is it not? And you then appeal to emotion. That is a literal fallacy. Okay? Why is your fallacy correct? Do you have any actual evidence besides it? We can't just dismiss it outright, because that would be the fallacy. You can't just ignore something because it's fallacious, but you can ask, okay, that's just a fallacy. Do you have any actual evidence, any actual reasoning behind your position? If you do not have justification behind something, then it is worthless, fundamentally. It holds no weight. A person who swings a sword without putting any effort into it is not going to hit their sword with any force. A person who makes an argument without backing or justifications is not going to make an effective point. An emotional appeal, or an appeal to just, oh, we all understand this to be common sense, does not prove anything. What is it that people kept getting on Trump on? Oh, he calls it common sense, but he has no evidence for it. Yeah, there's a reason for that. Whether Trump was wrong or right doesn't matter to whether or not their statement was correct. An appeal to common sense does not mean anything when people can't even agree on what it is. And common sense was common, or sense at least, because of the justifications behind it. You don't drink murky water. That's common sense. Why, though? Because it could cause issues with your digestion and other things, because there's a lot of stuff in there that doesn't agree with your body. Sense requires reason, or evidence, justification. There is no sense, there is no rationality within pure emotion. If you can't describe it, fine. Some people can't. But if you are going to make a claim, make it with what evidence and justifications you do have. Because I feel X is an unfalsifiable statement. Gravity was felt to be true before people tested it. Again. However, if it is true, then find evidence, reasoning, or proper justification for it. That's what they did with gravity. That's what Newton did when he did his tests and proved a lot of things. When he invented calculus, he made mathematical proofs. When you do these things and make these claims, you have to have a justification behind them, or no one's going to take you seriously, and there's a good reason for that. I do not care what your emotions think. My emotions say something completely different, and presumably they're just as valid as yours, so why should I take yours any more seriously than mine? For what purpose? Does it have any value? Why? Give me that justification. Give me that reasoning, because otherwise, you're basically saying there's a tea kettle in space in terms of how much value your argument has. There is no evidence. Emotions are fickle things. Nothing is proven on a mere whim. You do not suddenly prove that you are correct because you decide to say, oh, I feel happy if it is. No. You prove something by providing evidence and justifications behind it. That's how you prove things. Not emotions, word salad, or anything else. If you could trim my entire statement down to a far more reasonable level and just highlight the important bits, as people are trained to do when analyzing a work, you could still find my points, debunk them, or do something else. Prove them right or wrong. You could literally take a copy of what I've said, transcribe it, and point out all my major points, why they're right or why they're wrong. What is my point here? How am I arguing it? You can do that. You want to know what I would do if I did that with him? The guy who made the emotional appeal? Well, if I did that with him, I would find, oh wait, it's basically empty. And so, it's an empty claim. Continuing on.
Of explicit propositional knowledge, but partly because of the requirements for consistency and our finite nature, it can't be comprehensive.
There's a famous ruling on pornography that I believe the Supreme Court of the United States laid down, and one of the justices wrote something that's become infamous or famous, depending on how you look at it. He said, well, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And that's a notion of the incompletability of the representational system to represent the contents of implicit perception or the procedural system. You can know that you know something, but that doesn't mean you can describe why. It doesn't mean you can describe how you know it.
No, it's a misconception that when we make things explicit, we're closer to the truth. Because often what we do when we make things explicit is that we conflate half a dozen or more different considerations that our intuitive and unconscious minds are able to weigh remarkably effectively. We substitute for that holistic vision a single thing that it collapses into the explicit statement that we make. And so all the time that you're having to make explicit what you would do under what circumstances, why, you're limiting the world. You're driving it down and down to less and less meaning.
And thus, the limits of logic become obvious. You can't use logic to figure out exactly at what point red becomes orange. You can't use logic to figure out exactly why a joke is funny.
And that is incorrect as the final statement that I have left on. Now, the human mind is a wild thing, and with people, you naturally have what people like to say and what people actually believe. So, when you, as you said, with all these many considerations, yes, you have many considerations for any individual action. For example, weighing my life versus my parents versus those I know and everyone else. There are many different considerations I can place to make a final decision, including my own willingness to go through with something I believe to be correct. That much is true. But there's a reason we try to define things. Even pornography, which, yes, there was a Supreme Court case on it, and by the way, that one was one of the most divisive Supreme Court cases of all time. Now granted, quite a lot of them are, but with that one in particular, very few could agree precisely because of that problem of not being able to fully conceptualize things. One of the best ways to understand things is to put it into a practical form, to define it, to make it useful. And pornography, we do have ways to make it useful. It is works made to show lewd acts. In fact, forgive me while I Google definition of pornography to make this point. Technically I'm using Bing, but whatever. Printed or visual material containing the explicit description or display of sexual organs or activity intended to stimulate erotic rather than aesthetic emotional feelings. There is a definition for it. And why? Because it's a thing that people make. And there's a reason people can categorize it as they do. It is because it's a thing that people can observe and note, why am I calling this, and that something else? Oh, right, it's because of this, and this. There are defining things. defining axioms that make certain things the way they are. A triangle will not suddenly become 190 degrees internally. It will always be 180. Things operate on basic understanding. They operate within the realms of logic and reasoning, combined with empiricism and with slight modification from emotion. But emotion itself is a thing we've developed for survival. Now back to the specific joke one. There are entire methods to figure out such a thing. You can 100% understand why a joke is funny. Jokes have structure. They relate to the audience, or otherwise go to an audience that is willing to accept the joke. And they rely on subversion in some way. Those are all key things to proper comedy. Just because an individual cannot comprehend exactly why when they first watch something that is funny, does not mean that there is such a thing that is unanalyzed and unable to be understood. It can be. For example, let's give an actual example from a clip, shall we? And I can explain exactly why this one is funny. Now, before I do, let's go over some examples. A pun. Does it have structure? It does. You have a statement, and then you have a twist on that statement, often with a play on words. For example, some people make corny jokes. They're amazing. There's a clear structure. Joke, corny, amazing. Play on maize, another word for corn. And a person may not find that funny when I say it. Fine. But that is the basics of the comedy and why a person would find it funny. Another important thing is the reception of your audience. I am not a comedian. I'm not on a stage, or I'm not making a video titled Jokes to Tell Your Family. I am talking about a specific subject that is distinctly not comical. A person is not going to come to my videos to get a laugh, and so they're not expecting it. Any communication requires, fundamentally, a person to be receptive and willing to accept what you're about to say. The same is true with comedy. Just as you're not going to be able to convince a flat earther who refuses to accept anything other than the flat earth being true that the earth is round because they refuse to accept it, or an angry person to calm down because they're angry for a freaking reason and they're unlikely to accept your words, you're not going to be able to convince a person to find a joke funny if they're not willing to laugh, if they're not willing to be receptive to humor. Because people, go figure, have limits. They're not just going to find things funny when it's not the ideal time. And the main reason that people don't like explaining jokes is because, go figure, that last little one, subversion. You're not really being subverted if you understand the basic principles. It's literally just following a structure. There's no subversion there. When you give a rule of 3 story and say, okay, my oldest brother, he cleaned the dishes. The middle sibling, he was sweeping up the house. And I, meanwhile, was currently laying down in the snow doing nothing. Yes, that can be funny on its own. And it's a subversion, but that's it. It's the subversion that makes it funny. If you just said, oh yeah, while they were doing some cleaning, I was busy mopping up a place, well, that's not really funny. That's just continuing on with the regular statement. And if you're making any other joke, for example, absurdist comedy, you still have to follow this. You may say, oh, well, it's random, that's why it's funny. Here's my example. For those who are older than me or of my age, there was a certain, shall we say, set of YouTube videos made by a man named Tom Ska. I'm going to play the opening video and talk about it.
Got your nose.
Look how he's got a nose.
That was a joke, and many people found it funny. The video has 74.3 million views as of me looking at it, and it's understandable why if you understand the basics of a joke format. The humor is absurd, yes, but it follows a basic structure. A person does a relatively common task that's easily relatable to the audience, and what comes in is an officer, and that subverts the expectations. Instead of a standard thing, instead he treats it as if the person has a weapon and acts accordingly. Or more than accordingly. However you want to put it. And of course, because the ASDF movies are well known for their comedy, the audience is ready to receive the joke. They are happy receiving it. Because that's what they came here for. It's like if you go to a Dave Chappelle show. You're there to watch Chappelle and get some good laughs. So it's from a person who everyone recognizes for their comedy, on a place where they're going to see their comedy. It follows a basic structure. The people are willing to receive the joke, and it takes a subversion on the initial premise. The I got your nose bit, which is itself a form of prank and thus joke. Just because you can't understand what makes a joke funny does not mean there are not ways to. That rationality cannot comprehend why people do things the way they are. Psychology exists for a reason. It exists because people can study the brain, however, to a limited degree. And so, they make choices because of that chemistry and because of those reasonings. Continuing on.
Orange. You can't use logic to figure out exactly why a joke is funny, and you can't use logic to explain how you know that a woman who intentionally leaves her 3-year-old child in a hot car to die is probably doing something a little more evil than a woman who took a Plan B pill when she was 16.
Actually, you 100% can, and I will. So, one would be engaging in knowing negligence as a recognized guardian for their ward, their child, and they are abandoning them, leading to a manslaughter. Now, given the increased suffering as well, you get a worse death, which is as a manslaughter, brought about due to taking a simple item on impulse. That's the Plan B, right? So, you have one, which is a long-term death caused by knowing negligence, where a person actively chooses to ignore their duties. The other is literally just taking a pill, and because of that action, likely due to an impulse brought about by a person almost certainly dehumanizing a being for literally their entire life because most people don't treat them as living beings, well then, people are going to treat that very differently because they don't view it as alive. It ain't that complicated. Not to mention, a far shorter time to suffer means even utilitarians will be more upset with one than the other. For those who don't know, and I'm going to explain this now, utilitarians value all lives so long as they can feel. It's easy to say when a utilitarian goes to the trolley problem and says they would kill the one, that they don't value human life. No, they do. It's just they're weighing the lives. Because they're consequentialists, they look at outcomes. For example, if a person put a pistol on my desk right now and said, kill yourself or I'll kill your family, what a utilitarian would say is, take the pistol, put it to your head, and, well, I won't be breathing anymore. Tragic, yes, but for a utilitarian, it's about the consequence. The one life saved for the many more in my family who get to live. Now, does every moral system agree with this? No, but for the utilitarians, they're still valuing my life. They still care about me. It's just they're weighing me against everyone else and saying I come up short and that I don't outweigh everyone else in the world. Or everyone else in my family in this specific example. That's what they do. They weigh pros and cons. And they make decisions based on consequences. So even they will naturally say, yes, that zygote has value. But they're going to weigh all the future things caused by that person existing and say, yes, it is a bad thing to lose them. But At the same time, it helps other people, so it is not a complete negative, even if one might argue it's a net negative. However,
than a woman who took a Plan B pill when she was 16. Assuming you're not a psychopath. Is that a fair way to characterize the pro-life?
now he's about to say, is that a fair way to portray the pro-life argument? No. And he is correct. That is not a good way to portray the pro-life argument. And, assuming you're not a psychopath, well, I guess I am. How unfortunate for me. But it's not like that is a big deal. I mean, that's only an ad hominem that you are guilty of. And if your argument could stand on its own, you wouldn't need such a thing, or to engage in other such fallacies as you have at the beginning. For what purpose do those fallacies serve? I cannot see them. But you can keep making them. Good freaking luck. You ain't gonna prove jack. In the end, I will conclude with this. There is a reason we need things to be consistent in our lives. Or at least try to. Because when we do things, they have to function. The brain exists for pattern recognition. That's why it does things. It's why you can see a shape in the clouds, or your monster in your closet because of how things are organized there. That's why you see what you do. Guess what logical consistency is? Pattern recognition taken to its proper conclusions. Because you say, okay, I'm observing a pattern here, and that means this. So we can conclude from that, using reason, that this is a good idea. Take data, transform it into information, and then analyze the information before using it. Basic function. It's not that hard. We need logical consistency. Anyways, I'm going to end the video now because I've been stretching this on way too long. Thank you for enjoying my first response video. Kindly rip me to shreds, please. We'll see how that goes. Have a good one.